pandemic got us into a reflective space and made us look inward to see what we can do for the world at large. As a self expression coach, I became a catalyst for women and started Vani, a one on one coaching program for women on finding their voice, to speak up, to be visible. As a storyteller, I spotted there were many ordinary people amongst us leading extraordinary lives, making a difference to the world, and they needed to be heard. Thus was born You and I with Rashmi Shetty, where amazing personal journeys with their uniqueness and individuality are showcased. A reaffirmation of the fact: open your eyes wider. The world is far more beautiful when we acknowledge the presence of both you and I. Our guest today is Vasudev Murthy. Vasu is a soul in transit, presently residing in Bangalore. He's an author, a visiting faculty to colleges, plays the violin, and is a yoga and animal welfare enthusiast while being a management consultant. He heads Focal Concepts, a management consulting and leadership development firm. Listen in as Vasudev shares his journey into writing his latest book, Yoga Sutras Simplified, a soul searching adventure with Patanjali. Hi, Vasu. Such a pleasure seeing you after so long and understanding what exactly is Little Vasu is a story that we have to revisit now, because you're somebody I always notice who's like full of energy, full of life. Was Little Vasu also like that? Welcome to You and I with Rashmi Shetty, and let's listen to your story.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rashmi. Very, very kind of you. So first of all, I think it's quite an honor to be on your show. I've been watching several episodes, and you've done a fantastic job with some great people. So I appreciate this opportunity. It's one of a kind, certainly. Um, well, as far as what I was when I was a little boy, well, I was actually quite shy. If I remember, I was always hiding behind my mom to quite an age. I was always running behind us, sitting behind us. My whole only thing was music, a bit of cricket, and those kinds of things. I would like to believe I was a quiet kid who was very deeply immersed in music. Okay, I think I was a very obnoxious brat, to be perfectly honest. I'm sure I was not a very pleasant kid to have around. I had sisters, so I grew up, in their shadows, so to say. But my mother was, the person with her veena and her vocal and all the things she used to do for music to encourage me, especially the violin that came along. I mean, that was me. I asked for it, and she made it happen. So she was my rock in that sense. So I suppose that was the saving grace. Otherwise, if you and I had grown up together, you would probably not have wanted to be anywhere close to me. I was really not a very pleasant child, I think. Uh, but okay, maybe things evolved. Maybe I saw the world. Maybe I grew up. Maybe I'm still growing up. I don't know. But yeah, if talking about little Vasu, yes, I was like that. Cricket was a passion. Music, what else? Uh, yeah, I suppose things like that. Stamp collection. My mother was much into stamp collection, so that was probably good because as I was quite a kid, it was good to be in a little place and collect stamps and understand the world. Remember, we're talking about a time when there was no TV, right? We're talking about a time when there was no TV, no nothing.
Correct.
So those were the quiet hobbies you cultivated, going over my mother's library of books which she had inherited from her father. So things like that. So I think I had a very for myself, looking back, those are very, very positive and good things as a young boy to have been exposed to these kinds of things. Because, for example, music, you have to, you can't simply say you're talented. You can be talented, but without practice, nothing happens with the talent. So I was fortunate that, I really loved it. I used to sit in a room quietly, a dark room. I used to make sure lights were off, nothing could be seen. And that's where I used to do my violin practice because I just loved that kind of stuff. So I suppose that is the complicated, annoying kid I was. Yeah,
Okay, but you never mentioned studies, Vasu. How were you as a student?
I think I was just average. I was average. I was thrashed several times at school. Yeah, I mean, and I deserved it. I really deserved. Probably I deserved even more because I would just not do stuff or whatever. Obviously, then things changed in 10th, 11th, 12th. But up till that time, I was goofing off and doing all the terrible things that little boys are not supposed to do. I did all of that stuff. I had a collection of friends. In fact, I grew up partly in Delhi and partly in Malaysia, Bangalore. At that time, I was running around playing, marbles on the streets of 18th cross, 17th cross with other little brats in their half pants and t-shirt, totally grubby, messy. Or it was just a lovely, lovely kind of Malgudi type of scene. Now I think about it, it was really, really fun. But in the process, obviously, you do everything you're not supposed to do, and I think that's good. That was actually good. So that made me even more obnoxious as opposed to some people. Luckily or unluckily, whatever, because I kept moving from place to place, so I got exposed to different cultures, different music, and probably evolved as a young boy, I would think. So yeah, luckily things became okay in 11th and 12th.
Okay. So what did you do in 11th and 12th? You followed the herd mentality, took science?
Unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, yes. What happened was in 11th, I remember there was a very peculiar incident. Somehow I had set my mind that I want to be a doctor. Okay. But unfortunately, I got zero in some test in the 11th, an actual total zero. And it was then the guy, he said he was so angry with me and he used a lot of very hurtful hurtful words, and that was the end of life sciences for me. And then I went into my engineering thing, just like I suppose any young boy of his type. So I went off to a place called Roorkee, which is IIT. But yeah, that's where I went, and then things happened from there.
Oh my God, you make it sound like getting into IIT is the easiest thing.
Well, I don't know. See, as I said, you mentioned the herd thing, right? So
Yeah.
since it was a herd, you were forced to do some things. I honestly, well, one should not regret anything. Obviously, that's not helpful. But my mind was actually I was into music and writing and those kinds of things. I continue to do very much now. But because at that time choices, we didn't have choices, and we didn't have no one to counsel us on what we write, what we ought to be doing, etc. So you basically for there was no this highly complex collage of counselors and this and that aptitude, great words we use today. That time there was nothing like that. You just did it, and you didn't have any time to cogitate and brood. So yes, like everybody else, I also signed up for these preparatory classes and so on and so forth. And somehow I bumbled my way into Roorkee. That's what happened.
Oh, okay. And where did writing happen, Vasu? Because you just said that writing was something that you did even then.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
As a
So
science
again,
student.
as I hinted to you, it was actually all thanks to my late mother,
Hmm.
right? So she had inherited her love of reading from her father.
Hmm.
And so there were a whole bunch of books sitting in a corner. In fact, there were two or three books in particular. One was two compendiums of called the Secrets and Stories of World War One and World War Two. I must have read them 10,000 times. And they were thick books which had lots of stories about that. And so she was very good, though she was herself, she had only been, I guess her father did not allow her to go to school beyond fourth or fifth grade. But she had a real aptitude for languages, all kinds of language. And I mean, even till her last day, she died in her early 80s. But principles of grammar, infinitive, participles, and all that stuff was at her fingertips. And in fact, she learned French as well on her own. And she used to take me. She was a French guide to many tourists who used to come here. And I used to, as a little boy, I used to tag along with her. And we used to go to Hampi and not Hampi, Belur, Halebeat, and all those places. So she was quite a woman of her times, an extraordinary person, very honestly. So yes, the love of reading and writing and encouraging and exposing me to various kinds of interesting movies, concerts. Again, going back to music, right? I mean, that was the greatest gift of all. I mean, bar none. I may not have made a name for myself with music. I don't even want to. That's a different issue. But she used to take me to Sheshadripuram College. If you know, even today they
Yeah.
have lots of concerts over there. So think of it. A lady taking a small boy along quite regularly to Sheshadripuram, and I'm sitting there with her. These are great things she did, either consciously or maybe she didn't realize it. But all that obviously had a great effect. So that was as far as music is concerned. But like I said, writing, that was always going on. I mean, in the sense of reading. See, if you read a lot, you are going to one day start writing. So because of that, I suppose I started doing well in my essays and those kinds of things, and I always did rather well in that through my college various colleges that I went to. So yes, that's where it came from. Oh yes, and one other thing. I had, but this is maybe the story is off the record. I'm not very sure, but I had some friends in when I was in Delhi, and of course that guy sadly enough passed away. But he was deeply in love with somebody. Okay, this girl. Now he wanted to express himself, and he couldn't. So that the first story of Indian outsourcing, everybody says this outsourcing happened in Bangalore, right? In the mid 80s. No, that's wrong. It happened in the late 70s in New Delhi when love poetry, love stories, love letters were outsourced to me. So I would do all the writing, and he would pass it off as his work, and he achieved great success. So somehow, people also encouraged me to do these kinds of things. It was a lot of fun.
No, what I'm really curious about is,
Uh,
even if you're going to write love stories and love poems, it's a lot of inclination towards reading romantic novels or,
must have.
yeah. So, what kind of books were you exposed to? What were you reading? Just about
Well,
anything you could lay your hands on?
well. Yes. Remember, there was always, like I said, the books had to be recycled. Read them again and again and again. Two of my sisters in particular. One was much into P.G. Woodhouse. That was all she would do day in and out. She would be sitting in a corner and laughing. So obviously that I was curious as to what that was. The other sister was not like that at all. Another sister was into romantic stuff. And because I was young, I was not supposed to read it. So obviously, therefore, I read it, right? That was the idea, right? So yes, so she was for some Mills and Boons, and she was always VP about these things and all that. So obviously, I had to read her books and understand what the heck was going on. So yes, those kinds of things happen. I would say my sisters also get a lot of credit for reading stuff which I was not supposed to read, therefore forcing me to read them. So I will blame them or give them credit, whichever way you want.
And did you start contributing to school magazines and
Yes,
writing?
yes, I did, I
Do
did,
you
I did, I
remember
did.
what was your first article?
One of my first articles, well, I'm talking about college now, when I went to Roorkee, was actually one of those love stories that I had written for my friend.
Okay.
I put it over there. And then we used to write other kinds. I was trying non-fiction. I wrote a little bit about music and those kinds of things. But, as let's say, I was just supposed to be a good writer, whatever that meant. Then along came, then when I went to the US, then of course we had to write essays. I did pretty well for all those standard essays. Now let's talk about writing before I come to what I did. There is writing and there is writing. What do I mean by that? Most of us with a flair for the languages or whatever can easily, with some little effort, pull off a nice readable essay of about 1,000 words quite well. There's a beginning, there's an end, there's a whole thought process. Most of us can do that, but the real thing is a marathon, which is where we're talking about larger things, 30,000, 50,000, 80,000 words, where there's a test of stamina, creativity, staying power, and all those kinds of things. So obviously that didn't happen till much later, where I started writing essays, and then I was obviously, in terms of nonfiction, because of my professional things, I started writing long reports, this report, that report. So all that was happening. Yes, so that is where, and then I was in a consulting firm called Deloitte Consulting, which was that time. This is before they started getting into IT. So they were a pure play, what we call a management consulting firm, and there we had to write a lot of proposals and so on and so forth, hardcore proposals. So I thought I was the cat's whiskers as far as writing will is concerned, but I was not actually. And then I had some very good senior people who really gave me a whole lot of great guidance on polishing writing and so on and so forth. The net result of that was that obviously I wrote many proposals. And then when I came back to India and I started teaching at IIM Bangalore, which I think you're aware of, I used to teach these courses on consulting for the executive MBA program. And during that time, there was a very long period during which I used to teach this particular course. One of the publishers from New Delhi, Sage Publishers, you may have heard of them. They approached me and they asked me to write a book on proposal writing, how to write proposals. First time I met you, Rashmi, was in the context of my book on music, if you remember.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about the professional side now. That was where I should teach people how to write proposals, and then I ultimately wrote a book on proposals, which by today's standards is frankly outdated. But anyway, that helped me in many ways. So today I have some kind of a professional position in something called the Association for Proposal Management Professionals. I'm some kind of an office bearer, and I give talks and workshops on proposal writing. So that writing, which the seed of which was put into my mother and then cultivated by circumstances, friends, sisters, by profession, ultimately ended up in me actually teaching people how to write professionally. I'm talking about proposals and those kinds of things. And then you probably know I have a compendium now. This is my of 8 books. Maybe we'll talk about that. But 4 of them are nonfiction, or at least the first book that you and I talked about was a mixture of fiction and nonfiction, in the sense of ragas and associated stories. But there are 3 others which are nonfiction. So, but what I found was I was able to take risks. Okay, I had that cockiness or confidence, whatever you want to call it. So even my non-fiction books, one of them is out there, has liberal doses of creativity and nonsense in it. Okay, because sometimes to make people understand, this is my way of teaching or whatever. I like to introduce humor as part of the narrative, and it makes a difference. When you try to break the tension in a room when you're discussing something serious, liberal doses of humor does help. So that's what I've done in my thing. So in other words, the nonfiction also has very bizarre, little subplots and stories which are obviously fictional. Yeah. So that's what I've managed to do. I've managed to do both fiction, nonfiction. I have blurred it in my own mind anyway. The so-called distinction.
But my curiosity now is picked with you started with that book that Sage Publishers approached you for. But how
Huh.
did the book on ragas happen and subsequently the other non-fiction books happen? Did you
Sure.
put that proposal out to them and take it forward?
Well, okay. Technically, the sequence was that the book on music came out first. Okay, I'm quite a votary for animal rights. I have my own philosophy about it and so on. So there was a period of time I was very, very worked up about the whole issue. I had thought about many angles. I couldn't. The whole thing see just was the injustice and what have you. It was weighing on my mind. So I wrote a novel, the theme of which was on animal rights, and basically it was that the animal world was had there was an uprising in the animal world, and it was time for revenge. And then we were all it was what we call a dystopian novel where we were all eliminated. I'm talking about the human race. I enjoyed that. The whole thought was very pleasant to me. I'm an animal uprising and we were all eliminated. Sounds good. So I wrote it with a lot of passion. And then I had encouragement from a couple of friends. Then I submitted it to a literary agent, who then submitted it to Rupa. Rupa and Co was the publisher. They kind of liked it, and they said, "Could you consider, making these changes?" Which is fine. I said, "Okay, these changes make sense." Now, during that time, it so happened that I had gone to Chennai for some visit, and I had at that time bought 2 books of Kumar Gandharva. Kumar Gandharva, his compositions. There I was sitting in that train, the chair car train to Chennai and then back to Chennai, reading this book because of course there was no mobile phones, nothing. So there was a book, and I was so captivated by the brilliance of his compositions. I said, "This is air raising." Then I came home and I just in a frenzy I wrote 3 chapters, the first 3 chapters of the book, which I think you've read it. It started with a very unusual rag close to Desh, and then it went to Jai Jaivanti and Jogia and Bhairav and whatnot. So it was all in a rush because the compositions just took me, they just took me by a gale force. So then I made those changes to the original animal rights book, and then I also tucked in these 3 or 4 chapters of this book on music. So that thing was about it pretty much described me as somebody going through life, and then at various points in his life, different ragas come to him, the personifications. So Sorat, for example, was the very first chapter. Is really about peace and meditation, and then Jogia is about being completely insane, about kind of a passion for God and what have you, like that, those kind of things. Then they said, "Mr. Murthy, you know what? The animal welfare thing is very beautiful, but there's no market for it. But we think this book has got potential." So that's a story of how that book came to be. And of course, there was some editorial thing, but it was very well done because at that time the managing director of Rupa and Co was an elderly gentleman, Samehra, and he was much onto a culture trip at that point. So when this particular manuscript reached him, he was actually planning to have a collection of 2 or 3 books on Indian culture at about that time. So this was the right fit for him. Plus, he published another book on dance and one on something else. I can't remember what it was. So he published those 2 or 3 books at the same time, and then he knew the then governor of Karnataka, Mr. T.N. Chaturvedi, and so we actually had the book released there as a kind of symbol of Indian culture and what have you. So it was quite a nice kind of a thing. Anyway, so that was that, and then came the book on proposal writing. Now, to answer your question about the other thing, because my professionally, I also do other things, leadership training and all that stuff, and I've worked in several organizations. So then, also being a professor, I kind of felt there is a disconnect between theory and practice. When I say that, what I mean is the textbook says something, but the reality oftentimes in the corporate world is different, and nobody actually has documented it. Okay, so I'll give you one example, two examples. One is what they call politics. They say, oh, this organization is political. Now, nobody teaches you about politics at B school. This is something you learn because of exposure, and you have a bad opinion about it. But actually, politics is not a bad thing, is what I have mentioned. And it is a natural order for human beings to start segregating at a particular critical mass of 6 to 7 people. We start becoming groups and so on, and so on. That is one. The second thing, for example, is for example sexual harassment. Nobody tells you about that in B school. That's going to happen, and what forms it takes, what happens. And I have seen those things. I have seen people at the highest level getting away with it. No one's going to tell you about it. And as far as the rest of the world is concerned, these are fantastic, wow, luminaries, in the business world, and no one's going to dare to say that. But wait a minute, didn't he say that? Didn't he? No one's going to say any of that. So that's what I was saying. So this like second book after the proposal writing was about how organizations really work. So one is a complete theory, because theory is important. What is marketing? What is sales? What is strategy? All that is in great detail, supplemented by the practical side of it. Why do people dislike HR? Why is finance feared? Why is what does strategy mean, and why should anybody be in strategy? And like that, like many kinds of things like that. So that was right. That's why they really work. How they really work, supplemented with what we call mind maps. You may be familiar. Plus my insane stories that I mentioned to you as humor relief, right? In this discourse of serious stuff. Liberal doses of, for example, in the HR chapter, right? I talk about a freshly minted MBA in diapers coming for his interview because and demanding a senior vice president position at the age of 5. Things like that. I mean, obviously, highly exaggerated and bizarre stuff. But I believe it does help people then enjoy the rest of it as well, like balancing it out. That was so that was the second. Sorry, third actually, because if you look at the first music book, that was partly non-fiction as well, because I did talk about the theory of those rags as well underneath the story. So music, proposals, organizations, and now the fourth one, which I think you're familiar with, which was formally released on the 15th of October, was about the Yoga Sutras, which is a completely different thing. Has got nothing to do with anything I've written before, and it was reflected my past 20, 30 years of madness about yoga. Okay,
But I want you to take one step back
please.
and talk about the animal rights activist that you
Yeah.
are. When did
Okay.
that bit come into your life?
Yeah. That is. It's been a perpetual thing. I can't put my finger on it, but obviously, I my mother was, again. You will hear me talk about my mother all the time, and I think when I started getting some sense of reason. First of all, there was a dog in the house. That itself makes a small difference. And then I remember my mother telling me a story of how when she was a young woman, she accidentally killed a sparrow. Okay. When she was closing the door, it was an accident, and that was, I mean, talking about 20, 30 years after the incident, she still sat and wept about. She would talk about it and start weeping. That why did I do such a thing? And that thing was there. So I remember my sister and I, who was also older. She and I were crazy about dogs, rescues, and so on and so forth. Now this is interesting. We are both in Bangalore, and both of us are familiar with Cupa, right? But do you know that Cuba was started by this lady called Crystal Rogers
Okay.
in Delhi? So she was a UK, she was a citizen of the United Kingdom, and she was visiting India on a vacation, and she noticed the plight of animals, and she started a shelter in Delhi where I grew up. I guess my sister and I, we used to be busy collecting animals. We heard about her. And then I remember finding a pup in a ditch, and then I called her. That I remember we had landlines and all
Yeah.
very different days. And I stayed in South Delhi, and she was in North Delhi, and she came all the way to meet me, and she took the pup, and I was very, very touched by all this stuff happening. So yes, that was very much a part of it, and I was to this day I have seen that whenever I encounter cruelty, I'm unable to speak. I get apoplectic with anger and rage. You think a guy like me who wrote about the Yoga Sutras should not get angry, but animal cruelty is something I'm not able to handle. So anyway, so it went to various extents. I'm sure you have done these kinds of things, little rescues here, that and that. That's going on. Then in the past 10 years, I got associated with I became an honorary animal welfare officer. Okay, I had to take an exam and attend some seminars, and I used to get an ID card from the Animal Welfare Board of India. And we have done some pretty good work, not only me, others as well. Individual cases, apartment complex cases, utter cruelty cases, I don't know to tell you certain things that I've seen is really bad. Elephants, we had rescued 5 or 6 elephants who were in terrible, terrible condition. So many of these things we have done, and it's a very central part of my thinking. I am not able to accept human superiority as a concept. I'm not able to accept that we are at the apex of so-called creation. All that is not possible. You heard a dog barking just now. This fellow is a pug who was thrown out of after a moving car in Hebal. He came with head injuries to me. He's never been normal, but he's there. He's my friend. He's right there. And many others. There's another guy over there. He was not fed for like, I don't know how many weeks. He came like a skeleton. So these things are important to me. I don't view them as pets. I don't view them as somehow inferior in any way. I view them as equals, sometimes more than equals, because they don't aspire for anything that we aspire for. They just want, they do their own thing, you know. And in fact, the philosophy of yoga says, do not covet this, do not ask for this, do not ask, which is one wonderful concept. I think they've already reached there. So yeah, animal welfare is important to me. Even today, every week I get 2 calls from somebody saying, can you help us with this, or can you guide us here, and so on. So I don't mind doing that. I address meetings, I conduct webinars. I know the laws of India as far as the prevention of cruelty to animals is concerned. I can guide people which sections are applicable. I help in filing FIRs about cruelty. I help in confiscation. I think that's nothing great about it. It's something I need to do.
Okay, so here you are, somebody who's into music, somebody who's into animal welfare, project management. When did yoga come into your life?
It's actually an interesting story. When I was in Roorkee, I used to fall ill very often for no particular reason. I was just one of those hyper persons. I'm still hyper. You can tell, but there I was also angry all the time for no reason. I really don't. I was just what they call a rebel without a cause. You heard the term, right? So I used to come back. I would fall sick. Oh, this malaria, cholera, this problem, that problem, this operation, that. It was just a constant recurring theme. It was a very bad thing, and I think I was an unpleasant guy, frankly. I don't think I was, because of that, your personality also becomes a little strange. My father took me to this yoga, I guess some spiritual guy, somewhere near Cantonment, Bangalore Cantonment, to meet him. That was my first exposure. Unfortunately, that meeting had no result, in the sense that the man was very pedantic, and he was trying to talk down to a boy who's already angry about things for no reason. So it had no effect. So that didn't work. And I went to the US, and strangely enough, my so-called yoga journey started there. When I used to come back from work, I started going to this yoga studio run by this lady. And I did yoga because I thought I needed some physical kind of a thing. That was, of course, actually not the intent of yoga at all. But that's how 99% of people feel. When you say yoga classes, we're talking about yogasana, doing twisting, turning. So I was one of this, to the same. Then I came back to India, and again, because of whatever happened, my dad took me to this fantastic place in Jayanagar. Okay, he said, this is a great place. You start doing yoga here. So I said, okay, fine. And it was fantastic. It was transformational. First of all, we were with a group of guys, and we had to be there at 5:30 in the morning. So that very good discipline started there. The instructors were just fantastic guys. See, they didn't sugarcoat stuff. This is like an army kind of a regimen. Okay, nothing like let him just get in touch with Mother Earth and send your energy there. None of that BS. Okay, so this is what they would do. You have to do this. This is how you should do it. And I actually enjoyed it because there were many other people, and we all, it was a sense of, it really went very, very well. And those two guys, frankly, they had a kind of a light in around them. I cannot explain what that is, but that really got me. And within 3-4 months, they had literally turned me around. When I say turned me around, I mean that I was actually doing things I never thought I'd be able to do in many, many ways. And that started the stuff. Then along the way, I kind of missed a few months. I would miss it, and I would immediately see the effect of missing that thing, what happened to me. So anyway, after that, in the past, I would say 10 years, though I've been doing now for about 30 years, but very erratically prior to that, but certainly in the past 10 years, this kind of a very focused yoga practice. When I say yoga practice, I'm referring specifically to asanas and also to pranayama. Became part of it. So every day I get up, my first thing after I take my dogs for a walk and come back is I spend an hour and a half on the mat, and have progressed. I would say by any standards, not bad at all. I'm very, and you probably know I'm much older than you, much older than you, right? But I will tell you today, I'm at my physical and mental peak. I am. I'm in very good condition, and I know that I'm not bragging, but I'm telling you it's only because of yoga. The conscious, the clear, focused discipline of doing yoga for 1.5 hours every day, week after week, month after month, year after year, gives you a certain kind of a radiance and energy which I cannot describe. It's not a compliment to me. I'm just saying anyone can do it. Okay, and it has nothing to do with age. So all that put me in the right spot for the publisher to reach out to me to ask me to write the book on yoga.
Yes, you did. But how did the publisher reach out to you? Do you write on yoga? Do you write articles on yoga? How
No,
did you
I did not. Yeah, it was so because I had by that time. See, remember, I've already written. I had written 7 books by the
Yeah.
time, and then and they had been translated. So I suppose the publishing community kind of knew me, and this particular publisher, Jayco, the CEO, a guy called Akash Shah, I had met him in Pune in about maybe 8 or 9 years ago at some literary festival, and then we hit it off very well. And then he knew that I was very passionate about yoga. I would talk about it, and wonderful, you must do it. So our discussions were like that. And once in a while, on my WhatsApp thing, I write something about yoga on my status. So then he reached out to me on his own. It was like a cold call. He called me and he said, there's a need in the market for a book which I'm about to tell you about, and I think only you can write it. So I said, what is this now? So he said, look, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, we need a kind of interpretation from a self-help angle. Self-help angle. So I wasn't sure what that meant. So he said, we as a publishing house, we focus on books which are for mind, body, and soul. And typically we like to tell people that they can do these things themselves. And there's actually a substantial market for it. So can you write something on the Yoga Sutras? So I said, fine. Now I had glanced at it casually, but it was frankly overhead transmission quite a lot because it is a lot of very dense material, as I found out later. So I said, fine. So I looked at the Sanskrit and I looked at a number of different interpretations, and there were many of them by people much more sincerely they're up there. Vivekananda, Edwin Bryant, B.K. Iyengar. So many people who have really great spiritual depth have written. So who the heck am I to write about this? Was my thought. Okay. So then we try to figure out how to go about this so-called self-help. How do you do a self-help for Patanjali's Yoga Sutras? So then we went through a couple of false starts. Luckily, I had a very good editor. We had a couple of false starts. Now, let me explain to you that, let me take a moment to tell you about the Yoga Sutras. Probably you already know, but okay, let me repeat. So Patanjali was this figure shrouded in history and mystery going back 2,500, 3,000 years. There's a lot of interesting stuff that he was half human, half snake. And some say he was in Punjab, some say he was in Chidambaram. Nothing is clear. But he was, in any case, he has a reputation for writing 3 books, 3 major things. One is the Yoga Sutras, and the other one is on Ayurveda, and the other one is on grammar. Okay, but the Yoga Sutras, I think, is where people know him the most. Okay, but any case, so he and the history of how he came to Chidambaram, how he watched the dance between Shiva and Parvati. It's all very beautiful. How he came from the heavens, lovely stuff. So, any case, he had written this 196 sutra thing, which tells you what is yoga, and the brilliance of his communication is so amazing that I teach, Rashmi, as you may know, I also teach business communication in terms of writing. So I have these certain models of how to write, how to frame your work, all that. Okay. Then when I read the whole thing, I realized that this guy had predated us by 3,000 years in terms of how to communicate. Over and above what the content was, the mechanism of communication was extraordinary. And I will tell you what I mean. So typically when we start writing on something, let's say we start talking about global warming. Okay. So how would we typically write a thing on global warming? We'd say, okay, this is the data, this is what's happening, terrible stuff is going on, and then this is the other implications, blah, blah, blah. And therefore, this is what it means. And we need to take action. This is the typical flow we have been taught in our schools, that this is the way. And it's nothing wrong with it, but that's the way. Now, the problem is in modern times, people don't have the time to read your huge essay and want to get to the point. What do you want to say? So a number of models have come up in the West, especially in the management consulting field, where oddly enough, I've consulted them on told them how to train their consultants to write like this for maximum impact. You start with the end first. You start with the conclusion first. Okay, then work it backwards. So now, what did Patanjali do? Patanjali has 4 chapters. The first chapter is called the Samadhi Pada. Okay, he starts, the very first line is Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. That's the first line, which is yoga is a cessation of all stimulus. You don't let your mind get stuck. Now, so in other words, he reached the conclusion first. He starts with the conclusion. And the rest of the chapter is all about the state of samadhi, types of samadhi, how to get, what are the mechanisms, intricacies, layers, subtext, what are the kinds of things that will stop you from getting there, including bad health, laziness, all that stuff. Very brilliant practical stuff is written there. That's a samadhi pada. So that's the samadhi, that's chapter 1. Now, chapter 2, he says, okay, now that you know what samadhi is, let me tell you how to get there. That's called the sadhana pada. So observe the structuring of his thought process, because now he's got you hooked. He's got you hooked because you know what the end state is going to be. So how do you get there? Then he starts talking about the 8 branches of yoga, in which he says the 3rd branch is asanas, which is what we do, the physical part. And just for the records, since we're talking, yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. These are the ashto angani, 8 branches of yoga. So now if I open a yoga class, students say, I'm going to teach you yoga, and I say, first is yama, niyama. Yama is your outward behavior. I'm going to teach you how to behave with the outside world. Do you think anyone's going to come? No one's going to come. Right. So if we just jump directly to the 3rd and 4th, which is asana and pranayama, that's pretty much what it is. But it starts from there. So he gets into great detail, and there are these 5 of the 8 are what we call bahiranga, which is to say the physical body and outward behavior. These are the 5 angles or angs of this thing. Then you go, then you go inside antaranga, which is dharana, dhyana. So observe the communication dynamics, beautiful way he structured it so that you can't go wrong. It's just an extraordinary piece of work. So that's the second part, is the method to get there. The third is a very interesting one, and many call it a mystical part of Patanjali's work. It is called the Vibhuti Pada, which talks about the kinds of dangers that the kinds of powers and dangers that you will actually experience during this exposition. Now, those you may say these are all nonsense, black magic or whatever it is. That's up to you. I don't believe so. I believe that persons who do what he's talked about can achieve certain extraordinary powers, which is difficult to explain and may not bear the so-called scrutiny of quote unquote Western science. It doesn't matter. It's just the way it is. For those of us in music, we know how the sounds of certain kinds of rags make a difference. The sound of the tanpura, what it does to you, how certain some of your senses are heightened and all those things. So there's a lot of amazing stuff in that. And finally, he concludes with a final greater exposition, like an executive summary, and explaining more, what the state of samadhi is. And he ends with an unbelievably beautiful visual description of what he calls dharma megha samadhi. Which is like at that point, your karmas are gone, your kleshas, gunas, everything is destroyed. Even knowledge has no meaning. He says things like that. And then you're out at a solitary splendor of light. So, it's difficult to explain because both the Sanskrit and then put it together, it's very beautiful to read, all the stuff. So that's a long answer, but you asked how it started. So that's what I said, he said, let's do this as a self-help. So what did I take these 196 sutras? I took them 15 sutras at a time. I took the entire bunch of Sanskrit stuff to the end and the appendix so that people don't get sidetracked by the fact that they don't know Devanagari, they don't know Sanskrit. Because in my opinion, many of these books which try to explain our ancient scriptures falter in the sense that the reader doesn't know what to make of it. So if they get disturbed in their thinking because they can't understand Sanskrit, there's a high probability they will stop reading after 3 or 4 pages because they don't know what to make out of it. So I think this hit us, me and my editor, that let's take the sutras to the end and just stick to collections of the basic thoughts in these 15 things. instead of doing a line by line analysis, instead of having tangential explanation that in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna said this, or in the Rig Veda, this happened. No, none of that. So it's fairly simple. Lots of my own experiences, for example, things I talked about, my father helping me and so on. I've talked about it. I will put a lot of classical music references there, how Rag Marwa is like this and Rag Ramkali is like this and so on, because they actually help in explaining certain kinds of concepts. And at the end of every chapter, I talk about, which is very common, the takeaways of the chapter. I don't like that word, but it works. The three top takeaways from these 15, this composite bunch of 15 sutras. So that's how we progress through that. And there are lots of graphics. Graphics help. It's a modern technique which we must use. Okay, so there are about 15 or 20 graphics. I got someone in Canada to help me, a bright young lady, she did it for me. So that is also going to help the visual relief of the reader and also explains important concepts to them. So that's how this whole book happened. And during the period of writing, I went into some kind of a catatonic trance. Maybe it sounds exaggerated, but I think it wasn't, because that's all I was thinking about. Line by line, I tried to see what beautiful thoughts this man has written, and how others have written about it. I compared. I had this table, which is a mess you can't see, but I typically live in a mess. So lots of books over here opened up, and I'm reading this and reading this, the Sanskrit, reconciling contradictions, and getting mentally exhausted. So when it finished, it was like, I don't think I'll ever be able to write anything like this in the future. It's not possible. I might write, but not equivalent in terms of mental intensity and so on.
But do you have the book in front of you? Or
No, unfortunately, no, because it is available on Amazon, but even there they will deliver only on November 15th.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I'll send you the cover.
Yeah. But
it's beautiful cover.
and when you look at it now, Vasu, the completed works, and you're talking about it, what is that one thought that comes to you or occurs to you whenever you see the completed work?
See, I'll tell you. Okay. So it's a fair question, and I will give you an answer. But don't take my answer as something negative.
Yeah,
And I'll tell you why. What this seems to ultimately say is we're all alone. But because we are here because of past things, and the whole business of karma is explained very beautifully. Okay, how we respond to situations is explained very, very beautifully. Or it's called basically a calibration, a cocktail of gunas. There are three gunas and so on. So those are there, and then how we respond to situations. Why we live like this? What is our length of our lifetimes? Whether we are human or animal. So the whole thing is explained in these 196 things. So when you read this stuff, and you have this, you're overcome by this incredible flood of respect for this man. In 2005, what he said and how he said it, and how those words seem to be timeless. Like I said, the last chapter is this thing. A couple of other experts I've talked to have said this, give the same thing, that feeling of, you feel like, dear dharma megha samadhi, dharma, a rainfall of dharma. Okay, and the solitariness is the thing that there's no thought in the mind. You aren't, the business of the ego is gone. The feeling of individual uniqueness is gone. These are profound and beautiful thoughts. Now, so what I'm saying is that is one thing. You realize that you are alone. Now, in that, so therefore, I think it actually changed me in the process of writing, and subsequently, that to respond immediately to any provocation is not a good idea. And whatever is happening, there's a plan, there's a reason, etc. So those things are very comforting in their own way. Going back to the day-to-day yoga practice itself, which is frankly only 1/8 of the entire practice of yoga, asanas, even that has profoundly been affected. Difficult to explain to you, but when you do yoga with focus, your balance it can improve. You can actually close your eyes. You can have a band around. You can do very difficult balancing on your head or even on a single thing. All that changes. That whole business of dharana, dhyana, samadhi, focus, discipline. When you start trying to absorb it, into your lifestyle, your life itself, it starts making a major, major difference. Unfortunately, you have only my word for it, but I would like to tell you.
No, that now that you're in this reflective space, Vasu,
Yes.
the pandemic was one huge challenge for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, it was.
And was it something which took you into reflection as well? Was this book already there at that point of time? Were you in that reflective space? What did you draw from the pandemic?
Well, the timing was right, but I can't claim the book was already in my periphery at the time. That would be exaggeration. It would be a lie, but it isn't true. I was, of course, doing yoga. I had started teaching people yoga. Okay, because a lot of people had time on their hands. You had to do that, and a lot of people wanted to learn from me, and I started teaching yoga. So I did to some extent for several months. I taught in the morning, but normally, as I've seen in that process of doing so, a lot of people drop out also.
Hmm.
They can't sustain it, because it doesn't seem to be giving the results they want, or they've already pre-decided that they are not flexible. There's this
Yeah.
term called "I'm not flexible, so I can't do." But that is the objective of yoga, isn't that at all? But if you sit down and explain to them that's not the objective, there's a philosophy. Nobody has the time and the patience for it, to be honest. Okay, so that happened. I started figuring out how to teach yoga. But interestingly enough, prior to that, you know my interest in music. I had started teaching music. I had never felt that I was competent enough to teach. I never had felt that. I may have taught a little violin here and there to a few people, but all of a sudden I find there's a huge demand. Okay, started with my schoolmates, and they all said, I wish I had learned music. Why don't you teach me? Then one guy became two, then three, and four, and all of a sudden I had 25 people, and I was teaching them music, and I was not charging them anything. Okay, so I did that quite a bit, and that was very, 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 very helpful because very honestly, it prepared me. It made me whatever knowledge I have of ragas, which is average, I would say, helped me to go 2 or 3 layers below because now I'm teaching. I'm spending a lot of time teaching people who don't know much about music. I'm doing it because I want to see them succeed. So then it started having a different set of vibrations for me because I'm not a vocalist, and yet I started teaching vocal music. I mean, what guts, So I started teaching them. It was going well because suddenly my throat started vibrating, and all kinds of. So therefore, at the end of that, and even during when the offer came, it made sense because now there's a greater awareness. Even in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, he talks about the throat, Kantakupe. He talks about that, things like that. And there is this whole music, which is also considered part of the whole yogic experience. So you surround yourself with a tanpura and do yoga. What can I say? Okay. So the short answer is yes, the pandemic was helpful for me to discover that I could teach music to whatever extent. Helped me to grab this subject with because I did not say no. I realized the moment this guy said, "Can you write this book?" I said, "This is some kind of sign. I don't know what sign it is. I better grab it." Okay, how often do you get the publisher calling you and saying write the book? Normally it's you who's falling at their feet, but it's the other way around here. So I grabbed it. I said I'll figure out what to do, and I did. So I mean, I hope that answers that. Right? It was just timing. Everything went perfectly well.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we are at that point where everything went perfectly well. But if there are
Yeah.
three life lessons that you'd like to leave us with, what are the three life lessons that you have derived from life itself?
See, it sounds pompous for me to even to say that to anybody that learn from me. I have wisdom, you have none. No, I don't think that would be presumptuous. But since you have been sweet enough to ask me, like I said, that first lesson which I mentioned earlier, that you're actually alone, and being alone is not a bad thing. That experience of solitariness, with you may be surrounded by family, etc. It doesn't mean anything as long as if you understand what is yoga about, and there's a larger purpose and so on. Those philosophies are very comforting. They give you hope. So if you take the time to read about those things, you will not be dismayed by the fact that you're alone. That's number one. Number two is regarding passions generally. Passions generally. That it is critically important for you to be insane about something. Something you have to be abnormally fixated with some beautiful thing that you really want to do for yourself. Okay, it could be art. You heard of many stories of crazy artists, who just give up everything. I applaud them. They're searching for a purpose. It could be music. I told you when I was a little boy, I used to play alone in the dark. Today too, I sit by myself and I play, put the tanpura electron, and I play for good 1 hour every day. I play in the evening. Nobody's around. I just play for myself, and I think it's wonderful, wonderful. I realize I'm very lucky. I do realize that. But but now when I go back to my early 30s, and I had gone to Calcutta to meet my teacher to be taught, I remember how arrogant I was. Okay, There, in one corner of his large, not large, a small size, there was an elderly gentleman who was singing quietly to himself and singing very badly. Okay, an elderly man. So me, because my guru had said and introduced, oh, ye America se aaya hai, he's a brilliant violinist. So obviously that went to my head. So I said, what is this old man doing? And he's not even good. What the hell is he doing over there? Then I came to know, and it immediately humbled me. Turned out this gentleman was a cloth merchant in some market in Calcutta, and all his life he had wanted to learn music, but he never could. It was internal inhibitions plus his society or his community did not encourage that. So he wanted to do it even though he was 70. He wanted to learn from fundamentally. He didn't care why he was learning, etc. So what lesson is that there that you have to have a passion or anything, and you have to cultivate it actively. It has to be part of you as an individual. Otherwise, when you get into your 50s, 60s, 70s, there'll be plenty of time for regret. I know this because I have friends in the US who are very, very, very well off, very wealthy. Okay, they're, the typical American story, you start a company, sell it for $X million, and they're not happy. They said, I don't know what to do with myself. I don't have anything that I have actively cultivated. I've tried to, so that is the second thing is as soon as possible, get it. So whenever I meet people, ask them, take up music, start writing, and I pump them up often. I tell them, look, you're sitting on this kind of wisdom. And most people are actually, so, you know all this stuff, yet you don't want to leave a legacy behind. So why don't you consider writing? I'll help you. So that's the thing. I think those are the two things. But the third is, I suppose, to have a variety of other interests as well. I mean, you can't be oblivious to it. And I do. I have, quite a number of interests, and I don't feel there's anything wrong with it. So life lessons is too much for me to be lecturing others on it. This is just my journey, and I'm fairly satisfied with it. I mean, I've seen the world. I've had a decent family life, and everything is pretty good. So I have no complaints. And right now, at this stage of life, the things I'm doing, I'm busy, active. I'm forever, doing social causes, signing up people for voting stuff, rescuing dogs. So I've had a full life. So I keep myself busy. I don't know if when people want to get lessons from it, that's fine.
Vasudev Murthy, you truly are an inspiration. Love the way you look at life and simplify everything and make it so easy, while it takes a lot to be all that you have tried to be to make a difference. Thank you so much for this
That's
conversation on You and I with Rashmi Shetty.
Thank you so much, Rashmi. It's an absolute pleasure talking to you. Appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we come to the end of this weekly quest of You and I with Rashmi Shetty. Do let us know if you know people who make the world beautiful. Write in to rashmi.thethirdeye@gmail.com. That is rashmi.thethirdeye@gmail.com. Come, let's explore this amazing world together, both you and I.